Hi everybody and welcome to today's webinar. So today we're going to be looking at identifying in-demand skills and how to develop our teaching practitioners to place greater emphasis on skill development. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next couple of slides. So first of all, I'm really pleased to be joined today by Dan Beale. Dan is Vice Principal at Havant and South Downs College and is Principal Consultant at FE Associates. My name is John Gray. I'm Director of Further Education here at Emsi. So first, just to tell you a little bit about Emsi, for those of you who are new to the company. Our mission is to use data to drive economic prosperity. In a sense, what we're trying to do here, so showing this on the nice Venn diagram there, is bring together people, education and employers with the common language of labour market data, in particular skills data, which we're going to be talking about more in today's session. And we see that that really is now a common language across those three different groups there. So a little bit more about Emsi, who we work with and how we do that across the UK and across the globe. So Emsi in the UK are based in Basingstoke. We work across three predominant market sectors of education, economic development and employment. So in the education space, we work with further education colleges, higher education institutions, and then people like the prison service and careers and IAG organisations. More and more now working in economic development, including local enterprise partnerships and so on. And then in employment, very new in that space, but emerging market in terms of recruitment agencies, corporate and professional bodies, and so on. So we work across three product groupings there: software, API, and consulting. In the US, we're based out in Idaho, and we're part of the Strata Education Network. So the Emsi's data now as global capacity. We have lots of data, in a very granular level across the globe, predominantly focused around, big conurbations, but very detailed data in terms of America and the UK and other areas across the globe. And as I say, part of the Strata Education Network. So just before we get into some of the skills data this afternoon and handing over to Dan to look at how we develop our teaching practitioners, just wanted to kind of re-emphasise a couple of important points from Ofsted. I'm sure lots of listeners on the recording today will be very familiar with this. And just to pick a couple of key points out of the Further Education and Skills Inspection Handbook, just to really set up why the importance of talking about skills today. So just highlighted a couple of points here. So this is taken from that inspection handbook, and just a reminder about the importance of preparing students for their next stage in education, trade and employment, and really getting to grips with an understanding that local, regional and national context. And one of the really, one of the key things that we can do to understand that local, regional, national context is understand the in-demand skills which employers are looking for, and then really think about then, well, how do we train those skills in our students? So again, just another couple of points from the Ofsted Inspection Handbook there. Inspectors will review how high quality impartial careers advice and guidance enables learners to make progress. So again, thinking about that in its broadest context, not just about the skills that we teach, but how we signpost those skills. How do students know that those skills are important in their local economy? And do they know that they've developed that skill to a high standard and therefore can put that on their CV and really showcase that to an employer? So before we move into Dan, I want to just talk a little bit more about in-demand skills and a little bit about where the idea for this webinar came from. So those of you who attended our latest round of events in Manchester and Birmingham will have seen some of this content already. And we got great feedback from that, and so therefore decided to turn this into a webinar. So one of the questions that we often get, Emsi as a specialist in labour market information, we can get into the data and we can see the in-demand skills in a particular region. But one of the questions we often get asked in colleges is then, well, okay, but how do we teach these things, John? How do we develop these skills? So how do we develop our practitioners so that we can teach students these skills? So for example, we see things like problem solving, innovation. Those skills come through quite regularly. And that's, you know, a skill set in its own right to be able to teach those kinds of skills. So what we decided to do is partner up with a specialist such as Dan, so a leading teaching and learning practitioner, to give us that insight. So, you know, Emsi, we're not specialists in teaching and learning, we're specialists in labour market data. So that's just a little bit of context about where the session came from. So what we're going to do first off is just kind of set the scene by looking at some skills. So what I've done here is pulled data from our analyst tool. And we're looking here at a 25-mile radius of Havant and South Downs College, and we're looking at the top hard skills. So this is not by any particular industry. This is just looking at the top skills which were mentioned in job posting data across a 12-month period. And we can see there that the top hard skill is auditing. The little grey bar just alongside that is the national average. So we can see there as an example, auditing is really high, but not quite as high as the national average. But also then there we've got accounting, nursing, KPIs, and so on. And then an interesting one I picked up there. So just fourth from bottom is agile software development. So I decided to look at that in a little bit more detail in the coming slides. So next up is a similar data cut. So we're still looking at that top 10 skills, but this time we're still within a 25-mile radius of Havant and South Downs College. But this time we're looking at the chart showing how that skills demand has changed over time. So if each one of these columns is a quarter of the last year. So if we look there, we can see that auditing is an example. Started off in February 19 in first place, and has then dropped down over time into second place. And up to the end of April was in second place. So you can start to just see there how the skills demand changed over time. If we look at, for example, personal care, the third one down on looking at the left-hand column, third one from the bottom is the green bar, personal care, and we can see how that's slightly changed over time, so that the demand for that has increased over that last 12-month period. So that information is useful, looking at that at such a high level. That's looking at the hard skills. What we move on to now is looking at the common skills. Again, we're in that 25-mile radius of the college. And really importantly here, we can see that we've got things like communication, customer service, enthusiasm, attention to detail or detail-oriented, and innovation. So these are the top common skills that employers are asking for in this area right now. So, you know, just to put that into perspective, you know, the common skills, the communication skill is appearing what looks to be about 25%, 24% of the job postings, which is, you know, is a phenomenal amount really. And when you start to kind of cluster some of those things together, so good communication, good customer service, enthusiastic, innovative, if we can teach students those skills, then they're going to be really good transferable skills regardless of the sector that they want to work in. Alongside that data, the columns to the right are postings. So for this, we scrape publicly available profiles, so things like LinkedIn and job posting boards. And what we can see there is the amount of those postings which mention that skill. So therefore, communication is an example. We can see that there are 326,000 profiles, and 76,702 of those mentioned communication as a skill. So that's like me on my social media profile and my LinkedIn profile, saying that I have communication as a specialism, and you know, if I lived in the area that we've selected in that kind of 25-mile radius of the college. So really there we're showing that kind of you know, the skill demand, but also the demand, the supply, sorry, which people have those skills mentioned in their publicly available profiles. So that's looking at the common skills. So then just to drill into this in a little bit more detail. So again, we're in the same radius, but this time we're looking at computing occupations. So we've gone from a very broad view, looking at all skills, hard skills, common skills in that region. But now we've kind of zoomed right down into a more specific subset, looking at computing occupations. And what I just wanted to kind of illustrate here is that, you know, on the left-hand side, again, we've got the top hard skills. So we can see the different types of programming languages coming through there. So SQL, Agile, JavaScript, .NET, and so on. So we can make sure that if we're using this data well to develop our curriculum, we can make sure that we're putting those right hard skills into that curriculum. as well as talking to employers, as well as doing the things that lots of good colleges do already. But this gives you that kind of database in which to start from. So as an example there, we can see that, SQL is the top hard skill in terms of those computing occupations. But, really importantly then, alongside that, looking at the common skills, again, we can see that those similar common skills appear in these computing occupations. So communication, really high up there. Problem solving again, innovative, troubleshooting, leadership skills, just to pick out a few. So it's really important that as well as developing those technical skills within the qualification, we also place greater emphasis on those common skill development, because as we've already seen, although we're looking at here just at computing, lots of those skills also appear in the top 10 skills within the region. So what I thought it was useful to do before we hand over to Dan was just look at those skills, just to kind of tee Dan up really to think about, okay, well, the next step is how do we help to develop teachers to teach those skills? So I'm now going to hand over to Dan, who's far better placed than me to talk us through that and explain how that is going to work. So Dan, welcome to the webinar. Look forward to hearing the second part of this session, and we'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, John. Hello, everybody. I wanted to take the opportunity, as John mentioned, just to talk about it from a teacher's perspective. I think we can easily talk about data, but it really can have a huge impact as to what we do, not only as a whole provider, but also in individual lessons as well. I also have the fortune of having recently gone through an Ofsted inspection back in March, so I'm actually experienced with the new framework. So what we can see from this particular slide is some changes to the framework, and that we've got these 3 I's. So intent, implementation, and impact. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but in a nutshell, it's why did you do what you do, how are you going to do it, and what happened. But I think impact nowadays is not just about this qualification that we achieve, but also the positive destination a student goes to, and hopefully, in part of choosing the program they do, is based around also where they want to go in the future. So what we have on this slide is the why, really. So we need to think about this not only as a whole college. This is typically the mission statement, but also for an individual course as well. Why does it exist? Why do we run this particular program? And it should be bearing in mind the actual impact as well. What type of careers are out there? What type of skills do those employers want? We hope students will be selecting courses based on an end goal, not to merely gain a qualification, but to actually achieve a career of their dreams. So what you can see from this next slide is the flow, if you like, of the stages I've mentioned. So first of all, you've got the Emsi data, hugely beneficial to provide us with that intelligence as to what careers are out there, what's trending, where are their gaps, but also what skills are those employers looking for, as John mentioned a moment ago. So once we know those skills, we can then form our intent statement, which is, why does this particular course run? Who do we work with? What employers? What skills are we going to give you to enable you to have the best shot in a competitive careers market? So the implementation, as I mentioned, is how are you going to do that? So how are you going to carry out the teaching and learning and assessment? And then the impact finally as to what was the qualification achieved. But hopefully, what skills has the student acquired that's going to enable them to be successful? I think we can all do more work around enabling students to be really clear on the skills they've acquired on their teaching and learning programs and how that's enabled them to move on to their next job. Okay, so on the next slide, this is just a random example, if you like, of one subject. So for example, with A-level chemistry, you can see on the left an array of different skills that might be associated with such a subject. So there we've got things like analysis, problem solving, working with data, written normal communication skills, but also some of the associated careers that a student may wish to go into. And what we hope students will do is not just simply leave with A-level chemistry or a vocational qualum, whatever it might be, but also a very clear idea of what skills have I developed, how have I developed them, and how are they therefore making me employable for the next step. I'd hope students in upcoming interviews can really sell their skills and not just simply their qualifications. Okay, so on the next slide, we can see that the word sequencing. So this has become a bit of a new phrase with the new Ofsted framework. And really it considers the order of the learning that takes place. So for example, if you're working in health and safety or working in an environment in engineering, are we covering the correct health and safety units first before engaging with certain materials? So really students and staff need to be able to articulate, why am I learning this in this order? What have I already learned? And what am I learning next? So it's quite sequential. So from a sequencing point of view, it's really key that our curriculum offer is planned in a sequential manner, but not just the content of the lesson, but also the skills. Because we want those skills to be gradually layered in throughout the whole program, and not merely something that happens in week 1, 2, and 3, and then that's it, and then it's put to bed and never looked at again. So how can we ensure not only is the content of the subject sequenced throughout, but also the skills as well? So the next slide is just a simple diagram really of how we try to spiral the curriculum. So instead of having week 1, week 2, week 3, and the content we move on and we never look at ever again, we try and spiral our curriculum offer. We can ensure that we can revisit not only content from a subject, but also the skills that we want the students to acquire. So if you take that chemistry example, where problem solving was in there, how can I as a teacher build in problem solving enough throughout my curriculum offer to make sure it's not only done in a certain week, but it's spiraled and revisited throughout the program? Okay, so with the next slide, different colleges will use different systems. There's lots of in-house systems, there's lots of externally bought products. And it's certainly not my job to endorse any of those, but as a basic example on a piece of paper here, we can see that what I've tried to list is a series of skills that may be associated with a program. And we've almost got a rank system there. So on the top right, the scheme of work has insufficient planning to embed skills versus the scheme of work has exceptional planning to embed skills. So if I take one of them, I'm going to pick off problem solving. If the teacher can sit down at the beginning of the year and think, is my planning enabling problem solving to feature significantly throughout the whole delivery? Is the curriculum spiraled so it's not just happening once, but revisited several times throughout the year? Now, of course, the skills listed here are very general. What we'd want the teacher to do is using the Emsi data to identify what skills are associated with my subject, and therefore how can I review the planning at the initial stage. In contrast to that, and on the next slide, what we would want the students to then do is self-assess against those skills that the teacher has identified. So again, in the top right, you've got competencies are underdeveloped and competencies are highly developed. So what we want the students is to assess, do I feel I'm strong at that at the moment? And hopefully we can revisit this. So again, in our spiral curriculum plan, we can have key dates where students will self-assess. So perhaps at the beginning of the program, halfway through and towards the end, where we see that rating system improve. And the more students can engage with their skills and self-assess against, I think they'll be more aware of them, and then B, it'll be something that they can really celebrate when they go for that job that they've always looked to get in the future. So these are just two simple rating systems. Again, there's lots of different systems out there that can do this, but to be explicit about the skills and not just the content of the lesson, I think is a great stepping point. Okay, the reason why I talk about a spiral curriculum really is just on the topic of memory. If you can imagine learning without revisiting, it's like filling up a bath with the plug out. The water just disappears over time. And you may be familiar with research from Ebbinghaus' forgetting curve, which is the next slide, which just talks about how quickly information can go if we don't continually revisit. You can see there that after 1 month, the amount of material has really reduced down. It's quite frightening, really. So it's not just content, again, revisiting, but also these skills. How can I constantly revisit these skills so that I'm not forgetting them, so that they're at the forefront of my memory, and that, again, I'm very self-aware of them and what I need to do in order to develop them further. So with the next slide, it's a reminder, really, the importance of lesson objectives, of course, which is identifying the why of the lesson, what are we doing, but also how we're going to assess against it. I think what's really key for us to now think about with this new Ofsted framework, really focusing on skills, it's not to imply they were never there, but it seems to certainly be a bigger focus, is that we can have objectives also identifying the skills that we wish to develop within that lesson that are again aligned to the type of subject area we're doing and to the careers that the students may wish to visit in the future. What we found from our recent Ofsted inspection is that the inspectors were particularly impressed with the work that we've done in order to plan our curriculum effectively to meet the needs of employers and to meet the needs of the students in order to get to those wonderful jobs that they're aspiring to get to. And okay, for the next slide, this is just an example. On the right hand side, you can see what we've tried as a college to do is to be quite explicit in lesson to identify the English skills that are being worked on within the class. It's not good enough, of course, just to write them on a board. They do actually need to be embedded and have an impact. What we've got is English, maths, but also the general skills for the subject. So I mentioned problem solving earlier. So it's just good practice, I think, for the teacher to identify that in today's class we have been working on problem solving and collaboration, and then the students can be very clear that that's a skill they're working on. It may be one that they've identified as quite low on their initial rating that they wish to improve, or it might be one that's already very successful. On the left, you can also see an example from a business department of really promoting the careers and the skills that are out there, so that it becomes a constant opportunity for students to review those details, just walking around corridors or indeed in classes as well. Okay, so finally, and in summary, just a couple of key points to take away. So students, really important they know the why, not only of the lesson, but also the curriculum and the subject they're choosing to do. If we think about open evenings, students come along, they pick their different courses, but it's fantastic to be able to also celebrate where the course can take you in the future and be quite explicit about the skills they'll learn and the associated employers. Good practice for students to self-assess their skills at the beginning of the course and at various intervals throughout. Ensure that students and staff really understand this term sequencing, the order by which we're learning, the order by which we're carrying out our assessments. The whiteboard I just showed you a moment ago to really signpost the embedding of the skills. Learning environments to promote those careers. What's out there? Let's really whet the appetites of what great careers are there. Again, that Emsi data coming first. Who's out there? What employers are there? What gaps are there? What could you fill? I think that data can just have such a powerful impact on the student choices. Lesson observations as well, not to just review the teaching and learning and the content that's being covered, but also the skills. What skills are clearly being developed in this lesson and how well are they being developed? And then what can we do to signpost really good practitioners out of this? And how can they share their practice through maybe a skills bank or some kind of coaching system to develop practitioners further? And lastly, for all staff and students to understand, as I mentioned, the idea of sequencing. Okay, so they're all of my main points. So I think the key takeaways from me as a college that's not only just had a recent successful inspection is how data can really transform not only our curriculum offer, but down to teaching practitioners understanding the skills that we can develop in order to enable our students to arrive at those wonderful destinations, whatever they may be. But yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and thank you, John.
That's brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Dan, for that. Really insightful and fascinating. Really, often I think we can forget just how complicated and how difficult it is. We get involved at Emsi, a specialist in labour market data, in identifying those skills and working with colleges like Havant and South Downs to do that and to put that into their curriculum planning. But then we often can kind of forget then how complicated and how difficult it is, and the skill required by teachers and practitioners to be able to then put that into a robust plan and then be able to deliver against that to improve the skills of learners. So great insight there, and it is a slightly different webinar again this time, so please let us know your feedback, and we're more than happy to jump into more detail in something like this in the future if colleagues on the call on the webinar today find that useful. Just wanted to finish off by mentioning a new workflow, a new tool that we've developed called FE Analyst. Some of our customers will already be aware of this, and we've got webinars coming out very shortly over the coming months to promote this. So we've developed this in conjunction with customers and with sector leaders over the past 12 months. taking the best parts from our kind of flagship analyst product and building some new reports in there as well. So in a really simple to use workflow, we're going from that kind of headline overview section, so taking a really broad look of what's happening in an economy, whether that being very locally, so for example like looking at Havant as we've done today, or whether it's looking in a much broader way at that region. We can jump from there into detailed occupation and industry overviews. But then the next section, then moving into course development, is, well, how do we map that then into our the college's curriculum? So there we upload some of your completion data, and we can then start to map that against annual openings in the curriculum overview, and then work our way down that workflow then into a detailed snapshot of a particular curriculum area. And then down into brand new reports, validation and design, which basically then start to validate. So look at whether that demand is validated for that particular area or particular course, whether it be a new course that you're planning on designing or whether it be existing provision. And then transitioning then into course design, which gives that really rich, refined skills data that we've been looking at today. So once you've validated there's a demand for the provision, what are the key skills that employers are looking for in that area, and how do we build that into curriculum? So some really insightful and useful data in there. We've also got within this tool then the job posting analytics report, which is one of the main used reports within the analyst suite. So again, getting into that really detailed job posting data, being able to apply lots of different filters in that. Within the presentation today, we mentioned profile data. That was in one of the earlier slides. So within this tool, there's a section just looking at that profile data. So on that, we can explore millions of worker profiles in the supply side of today's labour market. So as I mentioned before, it's looking at things like publicly available social media profiles, so like LinkedIn, and some of the online job boards as well, where that's publicly available. We then analyse that data and look at what skills people say that they have. So that's a really interesting piece of the puzzle to put alongside things like job posting data. And then a report specifically around employer engagement, business development, looking at the key skills that are needed in particular areas, and whether there's demand in particular areas, particular occupations within particular regions. So a great report which can be used preparing to go out to visit employers, or actually to take out to an employer with you as well, to show that you have a really good understanding of their sector and the things that they're going to be looking at. So I just wanted to mention that today because it's a really good way of getting access to that skills data that we've been talking about within the session today. So please look out for webinars promoting FE Analyst, and if you want any further information, then my information is on the next slide, and what you can do is just drop me an email, and then I will get back in touch with you on that. So I hope you've enjoyed today's session. As I said before, please let us know if you've found it useful. I'm sure Dan will be willing to do more sessions in the future and jump into things in more detail. But for today, we just wanted to give you that really nice overview of how to take the skills data and then build it into developing teaching and learning from that. So thank you and take care, and look forward to seeing you all again soon.